Hey you. Have you been experiencing symptoms of mental distress? Oh, shh, it's okay. It's the 1940s, and there's a Nobel Prize winning miracle procedure that can relieve all psychological issues you may have, from anxiety to being female, even psychopathy. Well, that sounds swell, Dr. Poopy, but are there any side effects? Nothing major. All you have to lose is your entire personality, motor skills, memories, awareness, and generally everything that makes you a human being. Where do I sign up? Yes. Welcome to the Poopy Show, where we study man-made horrors so we may comprehend them. Today's video is, about the lobotomy. The morbid but once widespread part of psychiatry that had the same amount of sophistication and science behind it as drawing an HB pencil into your eye socket with the force of a knee kick. You know, when you get that stubborn itch right between your frontal lobe and thalamus. We'll discuss the different packages in a second, but first I'll try to explain why people at all thought this was a good idea, and how this ARG horror material won a Nobel Prize. Get around. The nightmare all started with German psychologist Friedrich Gotz. Late 19th century, he performed a series of experiments on dogs that involved removing parts of their brains. However, he only did this in order to study how the different areas of the brain work together. And the dogs were fine. Well, they were fine as in they lived. But observing their behavior, Gotz concluded that the majority were left with no intellect, memory, or intelligence. Which is why it was pretty weird that Swiss physician Gottlieb Burckhardt thought, yeah, I could do that on people. Fun fact, this was before symptoms such as auditory hallucinations were defined medically as schizophrenia. It was also before aspirin was invented. You know, just so you have a better idea of the time period and also how much of this was guesswork. The important part here is that this man worked in an asylum, and this prototype lobotomy was not designed to alleviate a patient's suffering. No, the goal of the surgery was to make them more manageable. And nothing showed that clearer than the fact that not all patients survived getting a chunk of their brain removed. Yet it was seen as a success because the four that lived did appear more calm afterwards. Things were looking pretty grim already, but the protobotomy still needed some fine-tuning. If it was toned down a little and made to seem more humane, it could appeal to a wider audience like iDubbbz in 2022. And that's what Antonio Moniz did when he first introduced the leucotomy, aka the Lobotomy Deluxe Edition. He and Pedro Lima first tested it on a human in 1935, and the procedure involved drilling 2 holes into the patient's head and pouring pure ethanol alcohol into their prefrontal cortex. Then, okay, so are you still mentally ill? Oh yeah, we did it. This operation was also considered a success, and it also made me think, oh, cool, literal serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer didn't think of pouring acid into the skulls of his victims on his own. There was some sort of science behind that a few decades ago apparently. This method was widely accepted as a means of quieting self-destructive or violent patients, and it only got better/worse from then on, because Moniz went on to develop this neat little tool, the leucotome, designed to disrupt the tracks of neuronal fibers connecting the prefrontal cortex and thalamus. Also great for eating parfaits. Yum. This tool made the leucotomy easier and more accessible, which was the first mistake. The second, if you consider the procedure being invented in the first place a mistake, which you should because it was. Anyways, after Moniz, these guys came along in 1945 and adopted the procedure. They standardized it and rebranded it as the lobotomy we all know and crave today. Also, hell, Walter Freeman, who was a charlatan, the devil, but more importantly not an actual surgeon, even mobilized it. With the help of a white van that people dubbed the lobotomobile, he toured America performing this life-ruining surgery like he's fucking Santa Claus. Look at him. You'd expect this guy to be selling ice creams with how happy he looks. I mean, imagine going up to him to ask for a rocket lolly, but instead you leave with a brain freeze that just hits different. I call this the express lobotomy, or the lobotomy express. Choo-choo. And this is what we all think of today when we hear the word lobotomy. The surgeon uses what's essentially an ice pick to pierce through the bone separating the eye socket from the frontal lobe. Then, well, he will blindly stir in order to sever the connections in the brain, hoping for the best. Because the level of precision he had was the same as some 16-year-old with 2 hours of training piercing belly buttons at Claire's. Needless to say, it was heavily criticized by neuroscientists. But because of media promotions in the newspaper, the general public really believed it was a miracle cure, so hot girls were lining up to get it. And why not? The lobotomy could take as little as 10 minutes to complete, yet it concerned literally the most complex organ in our body. There were no follow-ups with patients, yet 50,000 people received this procedure in the US alone. In fact, let's look at the first lobotomy performed in the US. It was done on Alice Hood Hammett, a woman diagnosed with agitated depression, and she was fine post-op, even stating that she was happy. However, not even a week later, she had difficulty speaking and felt disoriented. And yet, unsurprisingly, Freeman still considered the outcome to be positive nonetheless. And while I'm at it, I should mention the most popular case, as it's perfect evidence of how horrible and inhumane this procedure was. Rosemary Kennedy, yes, John Kennedy's sister. It was said that she experienced violent seizures and temper tantrums, and out of fear that her issues might affect the reputation of the family, she was sent to Dr. Freeman, who performed a lobotomy on her the same day. And Rosemary was awake during it. Said to have spoken to the doctors, reciting poems even. They, I quote, knew the procedure was over when she stopped speaking, and we know that following the operation she became severely disabled. Yet Mons was awarded a Nobel Prize for inventing it. And why? How could the lobotomy be seen as an achievement now that you've heard all this? Well, if you think about the time period, and if you take away the fact that Freeman was running a literal scam on a much larger scale than necessary, the lobotomy was cruelty born out of desperation. There were hundreds of thousands of patients that were not fit to leave the severely overcrowded asylums, and this miracle treatment could at least allow them to be brought back to the care of their families. Even if I morally do not agree with what state they are brought back home in, back then there was nothing else that could actually help people with mental illnesses. No talking cure, not even electroshock therapy. Antipsychotics and antidepressants came along in the 1950s. Obviously, the lobotomy fell out of favor then, but prior to that, it was simply the best solution because it was the only solution. Overall, I'd like to think that the attention Monads had was to end the suffering of more severe cases. But the lobotomy being such a one-size-fits-all solution without the severe side effects being talked about or cared about, now that's a concept that really terrifies me. Poopy? Yeah, I don't want to get this done anymore. Oh, it's okay, because we have a new non-invasive lobotomy alternative. And here you go. 15 hours of doom scrolling ought to do it. Funny boomer joke. I couldn't help myself. Okay, bye.